Welcome to Goldfish on Games, where today we're showing the Amiga doing what Nintendo did. As while Mario never showed up on the beige wedge, the Amiga devs did make platformers in that style. So as usual, let's check out Amiga first or exclusive titles as we find out the Amiga's answer to Mario. We start with Marvin's Marvelous Adventure. That was developed by Infernal Bytes, with 21st Century publishing it in 1994. And what we get is a very colourful game. But first things first, we have to answer the important question, what constitutes a Mario-style platformer? Well, the game has to have quite a few levels. It can't be just 5 and that's it. If possible, there should be power-ups. And I cannot stress this enough, it cannot be a collect mop. So no having to collect 100 doodahs before you can get to the exit. Your main goal should just be trying to make your way to it. And so in that regard, this game, I think, covers all those bases. As the first level, well, it's pretty easy to finish as there's actually multiple exits. But that's because this is more or less a tutorial, with these little help blocks giving you advice on how to progress through the level. But if you already know how to complete it, then you can just jump into any of these doors, you can just continue with the game, which I think is a very nice touch. Graphically, I think this is quite a decent colourful game. I'm not sure it really required an AGA machine, but this is an A1200 or CD32 only title. And it is pretty nicely animated, and in some places possibly overly animated, like when the hero takes a hit. But thankfully we do have a health bar, that on the early levels are pretty easy to refill as it just takes a few apples, and you'll find them on the floor. Or you can actually just kick a tree to get some more. But considering how easy the first few are and how short they are, you're probably not going to need too much extra health. You can also kick the enemies as well as jumping on them, but that doesn't end your attacks, as if you collect a few moons, then it will give you the ability to send out a ball that will hurt them, but these are limited by the number that you've collected. There's also some hidden power-ups, including the Angry Moons, and these things will float around and attack anything that comes near you. They're quite aggressive. The moveset is also quite advanced, as there's a double jump that can be a little tricky to get the hang of, and what you can also hang on to is ledges, as our hero can grab them and pull himself up if you don't quite make it over the edge. You can even duck and then waddle to get under some of those lower bridges, or even do a roll to get through those gaps as well. Now the first few levels are quite short, but they do get more interesting as you go along, and with 50 plus levels there is quite a bit of variation in the tiles and what you might expect, so it is quite the content packed game. Overall, I don't think this is too bad a game, but I do think it plays well enough and people should check it out. The second game is Charlie J. Cool. Developed by Nevada in 1996, and it was NCR handling the publishing. Now this is a bit of a late one for the Amiga, and amazingly there's an original as well as an AGA version of the game, although you might be a bit hard pressed to spot the differences between the two. The gameplay is mostly Mario-like, but there is one unique difference, and that is you have to find a single key in the level. And to make things harder, it's randomly placed every time you play. Now does this count as a collect 'em up? I'm hoping that you agree with me and say no, so it can be in this video, as it is just a single item. And does one item make a collect 'em up? Please give this one to me. The movement is a little bit slippery, with Charlie having a bit of a tendency to travel more than you might expect, which can be a right pain on the moving platforms. And due to the nature of having to hunt down that key, you might have to travel quite far to find it, or you might just spot it straight away. I will say it was really quite annoying if you managed to make it all the way to the exit and then realise that you hadn't found it on the way, and then you just have to try and look through the entire level to spot it. Graphically, this isn't the best looking game that we're going to see. And to be honest, it's a little poor by this point in the Amiga's life. It does have some nice smooth motion and some nice touches with the animations, but this isn't going to be your go-to game for showing off the Amiga. Thankfully, the music is quite good, and it even has the odd sound effect mixed in as well, so no choosing one or the other. The levels are a little bit generic platformer-like, as we have trees and floating platforms and bottomless pits to contend with, and don't forget springs. Everything had to have springs by this point. But there are also power-ups spread around the level, which might give you a limited number of super jumps or even a shield against the baddies. But the game does do a few unique things. As it turns out, Charlie J. Cool had his life ended prematurely due to a falling grand piano. Honestly, I'm not making this up, it's in the manual. And due to this untimely death, he ends up in a form of purgatory, as they're not sure where he deserves to go. So they decide to give him a challenge. He has to make it through the levels of this game, and all with a single life, but thankfully with a few extra health points that you might be able to pick up as you go. And where you go when we finish the game is based on how we treat the friendly and not so friendly creatures in the world, as this will move us along the judgment bar. Take out too many friendlies and down you go. Kill baddies and you'll move up. And with each section getting its own ending, or at least so I'm told. The problem can be working out what is good and bad at a glance. The bad ones will hurt you if you touch them, where the goodies won't. But do you want to risk touching one to find out? Now this got absolutely panned at the time. But these days, I'd say this is very, very average. It's not a great game, but I don't think it's quite as bad as people made it out at the time. Once you get used to the controls, it's not bad, but it is no classic or hidden gem. It's just a fine way to waste a few hours. We move on to not just a game, but a whole company, as there was one that consistently put out Mario style platformers, or at least non-Euro style platformers, and that was Core Design. And we'll start with one of their more famous ones, Chuck Rock. Now this ended up hitting just about everything, but it started life on the Amiga in 1991. And what a title screen that was. But you better get used to that song, as if you select music in the game, then you'll hear it for the entire thing. So yeah, I suggest possibly going with sound effects instead in this instance. The game, well, I feel it's a bit more of a mixed bag. The movement is overall fine, if a little bit slow. And it doesn't look all that bad considering its age. It has a nice background layer and even parts of the scenery that goes in front of our hero. It's more his main attack. It is very short ranged, as it's just this belly attack. And it's not even instant. You have to really time those attacks if you want them to land. And you can't even jump on the baddies, so you'll have to try and use the jump kick, and that can be very difficult to time in itself. But Chuck Rock by name and Chuck Rock by nature, you can pick up the rocks in the level, both big and small, and use them as weapons, or even as a hard hat, or as a platform. The levels tend to be quite interesting, with there being birds that will fly you around, or having to dodge, well, dinosaur poop. And the number of worlds for you to explore is quite large, each with their own graphics and baddies to deal with, so it's a pretty decent game. It's just a shame they didn't put a bit more effort into the CD32 release and added a few more audio tracks. They could have just grabbed the ones from the Mega CD version. This is a game that has quite the sense of humour, as I'm sure you've spotted. But it also showed that off at the very start of the game, as it had an animated intro, which introduced us to Gary Gritter, who seems to be a wrong'un and kidnaps our wife. This story is actually continued in Chuck Rock 2, but that was a joint Amiga and Mega Drive game, so it can't be included in this list. I think we're gonna go on to Doddle Bug. Which was released in 1992 with Mutation making the game, and Core being the publisher. We've previously seen this title in a cover disc face-off episode, where I wasn't overly impressed with the game. But I do think it sits in that Mario style platformer genre, even if it does have a very Sonic style attack, as you do just have to work your way to the exit. And there's even blocks that you have to bash with your head. But it might not always be that simple to get to the exit. You might need to solve a puzzle or two, or even buy a bit of equipment. And on top of all that, you also have a few items at your disposal, and that you'll use your pencil to draw them, hence the doodle in the Doddle Bug. But to be honest, it could quite easily have just been triggered without an animation, and it wouldn't have made any difference whatsoever. But you'll select these from the menu you can see at the bottom, and it can give you either a limited balloon that you can travel around the level in, invincibility, this attack, or a few others. And these are in a limited supply, so you'll have to find additional ones in the level. What's also quite limited is your health, that can get very easily depleted, as even a large fall will hurt you. And any health pickups that you find in the levels are a single shot, so if you die, they're not coming back. Which is also the same for all the other pickups in the game, which can make some of those levels harder on each attempt. The coins that you collect are also quite useful, not for buying extra lives or upgrades. Instead, there are characters that will let you rent a vehicle, like a submarine or a buggy, which is quite cool. But you won't always have to buy them if you don't want to, and you can save your cash. The controls aren't amazing. It can be annoying that you have to jump then trigger your attack, and he can be a little bit slippery in his movement. So my opinion hasn't changed all that much in playing the full version. So instead, I think you should play Premier. Now that was made by the 8th Day and released in 1992. And yes, Core was handling the publishing once again. Now I don't think this is quite a Mario style platformer, as it has a bit too much exploring and puzzle solving, but it is more Mario than Sonic or even Conrad Hart. If you've not checked this one out before, it's a fun platformer that takes you around these various themed film stages, where you're trying to make it to the exit to track down some stolen film reels. And on top of all that, it has this interesting mechanic, where you can move between the foreground and the background. Now I did a whole video on this before, and I think this game is amazing. And it has some wonderfully catchy music. And I know a few of you will now have that first level theme stuck in your head for the rest of the day. You're welcome. Returning to single companies, we get to check out Jimmy's Fantastic Journey. Made by Melon Design, with a few companies handling the publishing, this slightly generic sounding game came out in 1994. And it has a simple, but I think effective graphical style, that threw in a few nice touches as well. Like the fact that there's foreground objects that scroll independently. And our attack, well, it's a bit unique, as you fire bubblegum bubbles at your enemies. Now these won't travel too far in front of you, but what they will do is start to climb. Now I'm not sure if Jimmy has been huffing helium or just has very hot breath, but these bubbles will do damage to the numerous enemies, and will travel quite far up the screen. And because of that, you can also use them as platforms to jump on, which unsurprisingly is used in quite a number of situations in the game, which is spread across 4 worlds, each of them with 6 levels. So that's quite a lot of content to get through, and all of this without a single boss. Now the music is really nice and catchy, with there being a few moody pieces here and there as well, plus music and sound effects. There's a power-up system in which some monsters will drop a bonus icon. Now this will just start off as points, but after you collect a few of those, you can then shoot them to change them to an ability. The more points icons that you collect, the more options you'll have to choose from. It's a nice risk-reward system, as it will reset when you die. As with the numerous checkpoints, you might not get as many chances to collect bonus icons after you die. Now there will be a bit of experimentation, as you'll have to work out what all the power-ups do. Some are a bit more obvious, like allowing the balloons to travel through walls, but others seem a little bit more cryptic. I think some of them might do more damage, but it can be quite difficult to tell, because some of the baddies take a lot of bubbles to pop, and some will go straight away. There are also hidden rooms in the game, and I've managed to find one of them so far, and even that was a complete fluke at the time. It seems that if you jump in just the right place, you'll get warped away. So you might be in the middle of dealing with a baddie and then flash, you're in a hidden room. There's also a few walls that you can walk through, so you might have to start walking up against walls to see if you can get some extra points. And as we all know, points means prizes, or in this instance, points means lives. This is a fun little game that went to the effort of including joystick and joypad modes, so you can use that second button to jump if you have one. Unfortunately, being so late in the Amiga's life cycle, I think this was mostly overlooked, but I do think you should check this out if you get the chance. And the final main game that we're going to be looking at is Brian the Lion. A game made by Reflections, which was published in 1994 by Psygnosis. And this came out for the whole range of Amigas, with the CD32 version getting a few extras, so that's what we're going to look at. This was made by the same company that made the Shadow of the Beast games. And that means they had to have a very fancy looking game. And it's got lots of layers of parallax scrolling, shading effects with more colours, and even some SNES style mosaics. And as for the gameplay, well, they learnt a few things since they made those Beast games, as Brian moves around quickly enough and has quite a few moves. But he does have a very limited swipe, but he can jump on the enemies, which seems to do a lot less damage. So the swipe can be quite good, as the enemies will just keep blundering into it. But you have to be careful of the trees, as those falling coconuts will hurt. You also need to be careful of the tiny enemies that get very easily lost in the detail of these levels. So jumping around quite often might be the way to go. Although with some of the bottomless pits and water even on the very first level, you might have to be very careful with your footing, as it is very easy to die. And with just 3 hit points that stick from one level to the next, it can also be very easy to lose your lives just through being hit. And it seems that these bigger cats don't have 9 lives, they just have 3 to start with. But if you are very careful, you might be able to find a few of those boxing gloves around the level, which will increase the number of hit points that you can take. Hidden around the levels are also these gems, which you'll want to pick up, not because you need them to open the exit, as again, no collector mups here, but instead, you'll find that there's these shops that are hidden behind a cloud. And this is where you'll be able to buy more lives, more hit points, or even some power-ups. And these include super jumps, or being able to move faster, or even roaring. That will freeze enemies if you do a full attack. And one of the nice things about the CD32 edition is that it decided to shake things up, as you have a much larger number of maps. And even some of the levels are a little bit different, such as this one where you'll have to try and rescue these cage animals. And there's even a bit of talking with the other NPCs as well. So in a way, this feels like the Amiga trying to do Super Mario World rather than Super Mario Brothers, as there's even secret exits on some of the levels that will take you down alternative paths, so you need to be on the lookout for the different coloured dot on the map. There are even some bonus levels that you'll manage to get to if you beat the level in the set amount of time, which can be quite the task with how long some of these levels are. But these really show off some of the crazy effects they managed to pull off. These are the sorts of things you only tended to see in scene demos and not games. So it is a very technically impressive game. But I feel the level design, which does like to do blind jumps and bottomless pits a little bit too much, holds things back slightly. I really feel with a bit more work, this could have been a top tier Amiga game. It really could have shown what the machine could do. And as our bonus game, I decided to go with Morton Strikes Back. Another game we got to see a demo of, back when it was called Smidge. And the full game is so much nicer than the demo we played, as there's now music, as well as the sound effects. And they even did an AGA version that boasted more colours, and a few extras that we'll get into. But no matter which version you play, you will get a fun little platform game. That for most levels, the only aim is to get to the exit. But every so often they might throw something else in, like the need to rescue penguins, or find some keys. But all they really do is break up the gameplay, so it doesn't feel all the same all the time. And what also helps break this up is the graphics, as the backgrounds change all the time. Almost every level is different from the previous one, so it really is quite varied. And as I mentioned, sound-wise we now have music, but I think we've lost those interesting increasing tones that we got when you picked up the coins, which is a bit of a shame, as I thought that was really a nice touch. The AGA version of the game is a bit of a remix of the original, as the level order has changed, and I think there might be more levels as well. or at least there seems to be more exits that can take you down different routes. Not that you can really see them because there's no map or anything, so this will take a little bit of experimentation. I like all the animated touches on our hero, Morton, and the basic levels and everything. I think they're really quite well constructed, even if a few of them have some really nasty tricks that you have to try and work through. And the water can be a little bit awkward to try and swim through. And what's really nice is that you could get this game for free, or at least you could, as the developer, Confused Penguin, had the ADFs for free on their website. Unfortunately, that website isn't up anymore, but if you look around, you can find copies still. So definitely check this out if you haven't in the past. And with that, I think we're at the end of this episode. Now I hope you enjoyed this look at Amiga platform games in a more Mario styling. And if you played any of these back in the day, or if you have a few that you think I missed, then let me know in the comments. And until next time, I was the Goldfish. That was more AGA games than I was expecting, and this was Goldfish on Games. Thanks for watching. If you made it this far, you might consider hitting some of those buttons under the video. You know the ones I mean. Or if you're wanting more from me, then I've made a number of these Amiga Answer To videos already, so there should be a few options on the screen right now for you to select from. So I hope you enjoyed them, and I might see you again soon.